And for folks that joined a little late, just if at any point you want to share something and you'd prefer it not to be recorded, just let me know and I'll pause the recording and then we can resume. Okay, so I wanted to talk. One of the things I wanted to bring to the group today. Does anyone know Allison Davis? It wouldn't surprise me if you don't, but um, I find like as an anti-capitalist, it has been incredibly hard for me to find any sort of like mentorship or like examples in sales. Like that's been really challenging, and I look often. I actually like, I'm one of those weird humans who actually does love the business side of business, like hence being a business coach. I'm actually fascinated by business strategy, and it's tough. Like it's slim pickings out there for people like really leading the way and coming up with ethical, creative, fun models for sales and marketing. It's just like it's tough to find those examples. I will say that Allison Davis, although by no means calls herself an anti-capitalist, she's the closest I've found to someone who is like all she does is sales. She's just a sales coach. And I think she does a really good job. Like, at least for me, I'm like, oh, these are things that like I don't cringe. I don't want to vomit when I read her content. And like, and I think she knows what she's talking about. Like, I think she does a good amount of research. And so I'll just share it. Like, this was one article that I wanted to bring and just kind of discuss a little bit. Um, and I will say, like, she's exclusively B2B. So for new folks, like B2B versus B2C, B2B means you sell to businesses specifically. So you're usually like your point of contact might be like chief of marketing or a CFO or the COO, or it's the executive director at a nonprofit, right? Like you're selling to an organization versus B2C, which is like more what I do is like I sell to individual humans, right? So she, yeah, right. Not vomiting is an important litmus test for sales advice. Welcome, Lisa. So we're just diving into, um, we're just talking about kind of like some sales things that are working right now. And I'm talking explicitly about this woman, Allison Davis. So she does only B2B. So some of her sales strategies, you are going to need to like adapt them a little bit to be B2C relevant if you are a B2C. Does anyone, let's do a quick raise of hands. If you're, are you B2C? If you're like, I have no idea, that's okay
You
too.
define that
Define it again. Yeah,
B2C.
totally.
Right.
Oh, so the B2C is you would be B2C, Sharon. So you sell your services to one individual. B2C is business to customer or business
Business
to
to business.
consumer.
Okay, you said that.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't
So
you
is
did the
anyone
same.
B2B? Lizzie, you're probably more B2B.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I like do like professional development stuff. So
Yep. So that's more B2B. Yep.
okay.
Totally. Kayla,
Yeah,
you'd
mine is
actually be,
both.
I would think you'd be a little more B2C, don't
Yeah, I
you?
was just thinking because they're business owners, but
Yeah, I also sell to business owners, but they're an individual usually. It's not like a
yeah.
corporation that I'm trying to get
Okay.
on
Yeah,
board.
then
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
B2C.
So B2B and B2C sales strategies differ for sure. On average, B2C is going to be very heavy on like organic or paid marketing. So you need to have like either an email list or a social media following, or you're on LinkedIn or like whatever. B2B, you're leaning a lot heavier on your network. So it's a lot more referral based, and it's a lot more like you're going to excel more in like at like networking events and like getting yourself physically in front of like key stakeholders is usually what they call them, right? So these are like slightly different tracks for marketing. And so, Allison Davis focuses exclusively on B2B. I actually reached out to her and I was like, would you take me on as a client? And she was like, no. And I was like, God damn it. But I think a lot of her strategies um, can be applied on both tracks. Lori, you had your hand raised. Sorry, I just saw that. Oh, no, it was from my question. Okay, cool. Yeah. And so I just wanted to talk about, I wanted to bring up these three common threads that she discusses that are common threads that I've seen. So I'm going to put those in the chat here. So the first one is like a drastic decline in incoming leads. So a lot of folks feeling like the faucet just kind of got turned off and like things just stopped flowing easily when they were flowing before. For other folks, it was like leads are taking a whole lot longer to become a client or customer than they used to. Like it's requiring more relationship building, more nurturing, more emails back and forth, right? More people have to get in part, like included in the decision making process, or people are weighing options more, or they're asking for more flexibility in like the contract or the whatever it is, the agreement. And then lastly, like, and this is, I think, true B2B or B2C, like budgets are being scrutinized more than they have been in previous years. So people are, whether that's B2C, like actual customers and clients, they're holding on to their finances tighter, or it's like organizations and businesses are like, that's just not in the budget this year, kind of language, right? I see a lot of you nodding. Yeah. And so for folks that are new, like show of hands, who's in like their first year of business? Yeah. So folks that are new, like you just simply don't have this data yet, right? And like you're, I guess, in some ways, unfortunately, coming in on a tough year in sales. This isn't true for everyone. Like there are some folks that had their best year yet this year. So this is not like blanket across the board for all folks, but I do want to just relieve if there's I'm always looking for any time we can like remove any sense of individualism. It's always a great opportunity. So if you're like, man, I must really suck, or I'm like failing at this, or I must have like gone wrong somewhere along the way, it's very possible that that is either A, not true, or B, at least not capturing the entire picture. And so one of the things that I don't think she necessarily gets into too much in this blog post, but I have, this is my first year that my business has been like fully up and functioning, not a beginner, and the first time I've gone through a presidential election cycle. And that has dramatically impacted like my course of sales this year. So for instance, September is usually my highest grossing month. That's usually when I bring the most amount of clients in. It's very much like that back to school vibe. I do have a lot of clients who have kids. And so, like during the summer, they're just not really available in the same way that they are when they have full time childcare or school running. And so but then even for folks that don't have children, it's just like there's something about fall that you're like, I think it's just we've been like socially conditioned over decades and decades of like institutional learning that we're like, I'm ready to learn again, you know? And especially for folks that are in colder climates, you're like, I don't really like the time to play outside is like coming to a close. I'm gonna get cozy with my laptop or my book or whatever, and I'm gonna start to learn and dig into more intellectual type things. So usually September is like my highest grossing month out of the year, followed by like January, right? I get a whole flood of people who are like, new year, new business, new me. I'm going to like get serious, right? And so I get that flood of folks too. Um, does anyone else have similar cycles like that have been in business long enough to know?
yes.
Kayla, yeah. Sharon, yeah, yeah. Sometimes I'll get like and so for instance, like the times I'm slowest are like May, June, July. I'm like usually dead. I've now learned 6 years into my business that I just take those months off. I'm like, I don't bother trying to take work during that time because I want to play too, you know, like I want to be outside. And then December, I pretty much take like the whole month off. Like I'll keep clients that are on, but nobody's interested in working on anything, right? Again, we lose a lot of childcare during the month of December. I have like 2 weeks off from daycare during that month. It's like, and it's like holidays, right? We're like thinking about the holidays. We're not really focused on working. Um, so all that being said, this September, it was like fucking crickets. I was like, what is happening? I'm doing all the normal stuff. I'm doing all my email marketing. I'm doing my workshops. And what was really interesting was my workshops were selling out beyond any capacity that I've seen in the past. So it wasn't lack of interest, but none of those workshops are typically free, right? Like this today are typically free. None of those people were applying to work with me. And that is very odd for me. Like, usually, every single time I lead a workshop, I get at least anywhere from 1 to 5 applications after the workshop. To have none, I was like, really good. And again, right back to that individualism, I'm like, I've done something wrong. I've messed up. I made bad content, or like I wasn't clear enough that I was taking clients, or, like I just like went down the list of things that I had done wrong. And in reality, like, yes, there were some things I tweaked and those have made a difference. But at the end of the day, like when I talk to people, they were like, I'm freaking the fuck out. Like, I'm so anxious. I'm so anxious about the election. I'm so anxious about money, right? Inflation has been at an all-time high. The cost of living is like through the roof for most of us. And like, we know that like more than 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So like, the fact that, and like that affects businesses, right? If like our individual people that are purchasing things, even if you are B2B, and like this is where like a more like systems analysis of economics is useful too, if you are for my B2B folks. So the way capitalism works is we go in these boom and bust cycles, and these are actually manufactured and purposeful, right? So a boom is like we hire, 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 and we like ride that wave. We saw this happen during the pandemic, right? Online businesses and like the Fortune 500 companies did huge hiring sprees, right? And they grew capital super, super high. And then they fired all those people, right? And so we're currently in a bust cycle, which means we're currently firing. We're currently cutting the fat so that they can consolidate wealth further. And then they'll go back into a boom cycle again. And so if you can look at it from like more of a historical perspective, like this is actually a manufactured, very normal in the sense that like this happens all the time. This is not just like some freak accident. And this often syncs up with elections, right? And so people aren't sure what's going to happen as a result of the election, whether that's a CEO or that's like an individual person buying your counseling services, right? We don't know what's happening. When we don't know what's happening, we tend to constrict, we hold our breath, we wait. And then once we know what's happening, even if it's shitty, even if what's happened is shitty, we're like, at least I know, right? Now I know what I'm working with. And so my guess is like we will start to see, and if you show of hands, folks that have like a 401k or an IRA, anyone? Did you notice you made a bunch of money yesterday? Yep. Right. And so this is what happens is like the stock market shot up yesterday as a result of the election. Like partially it's just like the sigh of relief of knowing what's happening. People are like, okay, I feel comfortable spending again. And then part of it was we can get into like deeper economics of how the stock market is, really built to just continue to consolidate wealth. And so it makes sense. And that like Trump is going to be great for the Fortune top 500 companies. So anyway, so all of this to say is like, these are all systems that are outside of your control and are also like normal and relatively predictable. And they'll continue to cycle over and over again until like capitalism fully collapses, which eventually it will. So I think that like just having that backdrop, so you're not like, ooh, this is a me thing. I fucked up. I did something wrong. It's really not a you thing. This is just like a byproduct of like the cycle that we're in. I'll pause there. Any questions about that? Any of that like not make sense, or anything you're like, ooh, I'd like to push back on that part or add to that part? Yeah,
I
go for
have
it.
a question, as
Mm-hmm.
usual. So this totally makes sense, and I have a lot to say about election and the stock market. And do not take your money out as a protest. You will just be the one that suffers. I have a podcast episode about that. But um, I get hung up on trends like that. That totally makes sense to me,
Hmm.
versus not targeting people that actually are the kind of people that would spend money that's not like for the absolute necessity. And that doesn't always go hand in hand with who has is living paycheck to paycheck. Like
Hmm.
figuring out, like, do I need higher wealth individuals? Is that should be
Hmm.
that target?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
realizing I need a huge diversity of
Yes.
those like buckets of people.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to interpret whether I'm just like going for the people that I really like that are,
Yeah.
a little bit closer to the margins that app cannot pay me,
Yeah.
versus the people that are
Absolutely.
going to be my
Yeah.
inner circle that I need.
Yeah. So you have kind of, I would say, like, what I've learned over the last 6 years is you kind of have, I guess technically you probably have three options here. Option one is if you want like consistent money and you want it like, yeah, consistently, and you want a decent amount of it, you're probably going to have to target high wealth, like high gross net individuals, right? Or businesses that have, this is where it gets a little tricky with B2B, because businesses that have high worth are always going to do that boom and bust. They're always going to grow, grow, grow and cut. And so you're inevitably going to hit those cut years. Like there's no way to avoid that. So what you would want to do is like have enough high wealth companies that you can kind of cover. And then you would want to be good at like saving when you make a fuck ton of money, save a portion of that for when you're not going to make money, like just thinking ahead. So option one is like only work with people that have money. Option two is like only work with people that don't have money but are really aligned with your values. And you're going to like probably struggle, right? You're probably going to have a lot more fluctuation. You're going to have to work a little bit harder a lot of the time to like get those folks in. You're probably going to have to figure out some sort of like either outside financial aid support. So, like, can you get a grant on board? Can you get sponsorship on board? Like, can you get one of either the state or a high wealth company to pay to subsidize your services, right? Or can you work on a sliding scale model in some capacity? The other option that falls into that bucket is like, can you take on a part time job that supports some of your finances so you can spend the rest of your time working with people that are really values aligned? And then the third option is like, can you come up with a blend of that like whole portfolio? Right. And so I think that was something for me that like I resisted for a while. I was like, I do not want to work with high wealth individuals. And like when I say high wealth, I mean like I'm not interested in working with people that are millionaires. I'm not interested in working with people that their main goal is to like grow a sole proprietorship into like 500K net plus. Like that's just not the people I'm interested in working with. But I found very quickly that if I didn't go with after those folks, I didn't make enough money to pay my bills. And so I was like, okay, how do we figure like where do we go from here? For me, it was grants, right? It was figuring out how to pull grant funding in, get the state to pay, and then supplementing with a part-time job, supplementing with some like consulting work, right? Like I had to kind of diversify where the revenue was coming from. But I know other folks that like really focus on just like I cost X amount of thousands of dollars and like either you can afford it or not. And I go after folks that can afford it. And like again, I think like rejecting any I think I try to like I'm not interested in blaming individuals or shaming individuals for choosing that track because that track is like a byproduct of like the systemic inequality that is like capitalism. And so like I wouldn't get too hung up on like shaming yourself or feeling guilty if you are taking in high net worth individuals or companies. And also, like, what are you doing with that money? Like, if is all that, do you need all that money? Are you redistributing some of that money? Are you creating a couple free slots to work with you as a result of that money? Like, is there a way that we can use that money to kind of, in some ways offset like where that money is coming from? Is that helpful? Yeah. Yeah, go for it, Emily.
I'm curious, have you ever seen a sliding scale price option work with a high ticket item as opposed to a low ticket sales item?
Yeah. So I tried sliding scale. For context, it's $3,000 to work with me for 4 months. So it's about $750 a month. And I have sold anywhere from $300 a month up to $1,000 a month. We can talk about like what happened at either of those ends of that range as well. And I've tried sliding scales um, I learned very quickly I cannot afford to live on $300 a month from clients. That does not work. It's not financially stable. But it did get the business started. So like that's where I started. Like the first year that I offered business coaching, it was $300 a month, and it let me get going really quickly. Now that being said, I had no children yet, and I had a partner who had a really stable job who held our health insurance, right? So like I had that freedom and that privilege to be able to do that. So I think there's nothing wrong with starting low so you can test the waters and figure out like what the hell is it I do. And then on the top end of $1,000 a month, I didn't think what I did was worth that. I was like, this doesn't feel ethical. I don't think there's any universe where like what I'm providing is worth that much money. I was moving into a zone where it felt like this doesn't work for me. And so what I've figured out now is like my sliding scale, it's $3,000 a month is like what it costs for me to cover my services, pay for all of my personal expenses, my family, our food, blah, 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 plus some. So I have built in plus some in that price. And so what I'm able to do is I can now go down to 2000 at the lowest. I can accommodate that discrepancy. I cannot accommodate it for everyone. And so I've had to like figure out like how many of those can I take? And then that's where also like the grants come in. So yes, I think like sliding scale can work. I'll actually give you a really cool example of what I think is better than sliding scale for many people. Let's find these. You know, solidarity economy, Emily? You do? Or sorry, the New Economy Coalition. Are you familiar with them? Okay. These folks are amazing. And I'll just throw this in the chat here. So if you scroll down in that link down to member dues, I can also share my screen if that's helpful for, does someone want me to share my screen? Is that helpful? Yeah, totally, Caitlin. We can talk more about grants. So if you scroll down to member dues, I'll just bring this over here. Here under member dues, I actually think this is a much more sustainable and like, see, the problem I have sometimes with sliding scale is if it's not based in fact, I'm like, what are these numbers? First of all, your pricing should always be based in fact, right? There should be like an equation that equals your pricing. This gets tricky for some service providers because they're like, yeah, it's just the shit in my head and I talk and how do I value that? But like that price should be based on like how much does it cost for you to live? How much does it cost for you to save for retirement? How much does it cost to like any of the systems and things you need, like your website, your email, like all that jazz, we bundle all that in. And then we need to add a little bit. Usually it's anywhere between like 2.5 to like 15% typically is like the range. It's a pretty wide range. It's actually like 2.5 to 20% is a profit margin typically for service providers. The 2.5 to 5% tends to be more like restaurant folks and farms. They tend to have a lower profit margin. Whereas like for me, I'm going to have like, it's pretty easy for me to hit a 20% profit margin because my expenses from the business itself are not that high. But this I think is really interesting. So if you were to think about like if there's a way for you to look at people's like, do you sell to like individual homeowners or yeah?
Individual homeowners, we've done a couple community living developments
Cool.
for indigenous communities as well.
Yeah.
So the impact is a huge part of what we do.
Yeah.
I don't know if we haven't, it's necessarily built into our sales at the moment
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this.
So what I would look at is there a way for you to base the sliding scale on folks like revenue or on their budget or on like their access to wealth or their access to a loan? Like if we could have an equation that pumps out a number for them,
Mhm.
that I think is actually a much more compelling and sustainable sales strategy than just like have you seen like the green bottle? So this is the sliding scale that a lot of folks use. And it's one that I tried for a while. Like here it is. Can you see this? The lettering is so tiny. And so it's essentially like what's hard about this is, so in theory, you would say like a full bottle is $500, a half bottle is 250 or is like $300. This last bottle is like $150, like just to say for services. The problem I have found is like most folks are not going to read this. They're not going to read this description. So unless you're going to sit down and talk them through it, I think that can work. And most folks, in my experience, are going to pick the bottom. And even if they don't qualify for that. And like, I think, again, that's not that people are like greedy or selfish. It's like when given the opportunity, I don't want to pay more either. Like, this is hard, like if I can get something and not pay a ton for it, like, yeah, I'd prefer not to. This happened this weekend. I went and got a massage. Um, and yeah, especially white people, Sharon. That's a very valid point. And I didn't know it was sliding scale. I thought it was $130. And then and so I had already paid ahead of time. And the massage ended, and she was like, "It's sliding scale 100 to 130. What would you like to pay?" And I was like, "Oh, I already paid." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then in my head, I was like, "Ooh, I could have paid 110. I could have paid 115." But I was fine with I could pay 130. I was not, that had not been a point of resistance for me until the option to pay less was introduced. And so that's where I think sometimes having these kind of choose your own adventure sliding scale can kind of backfire. And I think particularly to Sharon's point, especially for white people. And we can dive into that more if we want to. But so I would say like the other option is like make sure that you can sustain the bottom of the sliding scale. If you can't, then like this isn't a good sliding scale for you. Um,
I, I have
or
a
come up with an
question.
equation. Yeah, go for it. Go, Rose.
You mentioned that you figured out that 300 didn't work, but it did get the business going. So are you kind of
Mm-hmm.
glad that you kind of went that route and experienced that and then
Oh,
figured it out from there?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think like that's fascinating. Sorry, I just read Lake said that the person who created this green bottle doesn't even use it anymore. So maybe further proofs my own experience in this measure. Yeah, so I would say like I'm very glad that I think it's when you're just starting, for me, I don't, first of all, it sucks ass to have to lower your prices. Like it does not feel good for you. It doesn't really feel good to look at. You're like, ooh, that person messed up. They gotta like go back. It doesn't feel good. So I would much rather start low and build as you prove proof of concept, right? Like, and I think also like there's, at least on my end, like I've seen quite a bit of like advice for online business owners to kind of fake it until you make it. I don't think that is a wise strategy. I think it leaves you feeling like an imposter for a long period of time until you figure your shit out. I would rather be honest and candid of like, I'm just starting, I'm just figuring this out, and I'm probably going to make some mistakes along the way. And that's why it's cheaper. Like, that's why it costs this, right? Eventually it won't. Eventually this will be more expensive. But right now I'm figuring it out. And like, if you're interested in figuring it out with me, you get to pay less. Like, that's a win-win, right? I'd prefer to just take it that way. Yeah. I think, and there's a difference between like, there's a point that your price gets too low, and then you also run into an issue of like people aren't going to be held responsible to doing the thing that y'all set out to do. This is something people struggle with sometimes when things are free. Um, like if it's some coaches will advise like you shouldn't do anything for free, particularly in the beginning, because you're not going to get buy-in. People aren't going to like adhere. I think it's, yeah, right. Like, so like a lot of no shows for a $5 virtual yoga class. Yeah. There are like, I think there, it's playing with, and people's audiences are different. So some people are going to show up big and respond strongly. Like, this is free. Y'all are here, like, so it's not that like free doesn't work. It's free does require like, if I don't send numerous emails to remind you to come, y'all don't come, right? Like, you need reminding, and like, I think sometimes it's also like proof of concept, right? You come once, you hopefully gain something, you learn something. So you're like, okay, it's worth my time. I'm going to come again. But I agree. If something's cheap, I'm much more likely to back out of it than if I've paid for it, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, go for it, Sandy.
I I am on the path to offer a sliding scale, but and I was, moving more towards the green bottle, not exactly, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious how you introduce your sliding scale to your clients.
Yeah, I can show you. So this is where it starts. So the first thing I'll say is I do not offer a sliding scale unless someone asks for it.
Okay.
Is the first step.
That's
And
helpful.
so, yeah, because again, it's kind of like we don't need to put things in people as we don't need to offer things unless they're needed, I find. And so what I do is I start with an application. And so it's a pretty short application to work with me. I ask you like, what do you think you're doing really well? Why do you think right now is a time to work on whatever it is you want to work on? What's not working? And then I ask here, I'm very candid, like, this is how much it costs to work with me. I do offer a monthly payment plan with no added fees. This is a huge pet peeve of mine. Do not charge people more for needing a payment plan. The reason they need a payment plan is because they don't have enough money. So, like, stop penalizing them for not having enough money. That does not feel kind to me. Yes, I understand it requires more credit card processing fees, and I understand you're at more risk by having a payment plan than being paid in full. But if your goal truly is like equitable access to your resources, like, stop penalizing people for needing a payment plan. That drives me nuts. So what I ask is like, will you need help paying? Yes, I won't be able to do this without financial aid. This has been fascinating. I say financial aid would be dope, but it's not a barrier to me working with you. The amount of people that click that, I'm like, all right, that's helpful, because then I'm like, okay. And then some people, I would say one out of, I mean, I definitely veer towards people, like, I actively promote for folks that are experiencing financial hardship. So I like skew that way. But I would say one out of every 15 applicants clicks, I'm not currently looking for financial aid. Like, I just don't, that's not what I need right now. So there are people that don't need help. There are less, maybe, but there are people. And I would say like this has been really helpful, because then it's like, if you click this button, then I know that if you don't live in Vermont, then I need to offer you a sliding scale. Because if you live in Vermont, you hopefully will qualify for the grant program I'm with. And the state of Vermont is going to hopefully just pay for your coaching with me. Hopefully. If you don't live in Vermont, then that's when I'm going to start to offer a sliding scale. I'm going to say, and usually what I start with is like they know it costs 3,000 to work with me. I say, what do you think? Like, what do you think you can pay? What would feel comfortable? Like, actually, the sentence I use is what feels generous but does not cause you harm. And that is like, I have found that to be really helpful because if you just ask, like, what's a number that doesn't cause you harm? I would say $0 causes me no harm. But if I'm asking you to like be generous, I'm going to put a lot of labor into this. I'm going to show up for you every single week. Like, what is that number? And if that number is below 2,000, which is my bottom, then depending on where I'm at, like sometimes I can make an exception, but other times I'm like 2,000 is the bottom that I can go. And so then what I do is and this was like one of my points for today is like people need more flexibility now than usual. So my coaching program is 4 months. If I need 2,000 and you are like 2,000 is hard, I ask you if you can pay the 2,000 over 6 months or over 8 months, right? Like I'm going to extend the payment plan past the time that we're done and see if that makes a difference. For many folks, they're like, yep, that's doable. Like, because now what was like, I don't know, $400 a month is now $200 a month. And like, so we can kind of if you're willing, we can get flexible with like how the money comes in. The other thing I have started doing, which like I think probably has like mixed opinions, is I started charging for credit cards. I like don't want to, and so people are now all paying by check. And so that has like been really helpful because then I actually get to keep all the money. Whereas, if we do like, what is it, a 3.5%? Is that credit cards now? So 3,000 times 3.5%. Yeah, I'm losing $100 on every coaching package by using a credit card. Like that adds up. That's like probably, I would guess, anywhere from like $2,000 to $3,000 a year I lose. And so I just started asking people to pay by check. Yeah, so if I ask if they want to use a credit card, I just give them the percentage that my credit card is going to charge me. So I'm like, yeah, it's 3% more. So they pay an extra $100 or whatever. So the package is now 3,100 if they want to use a credit card. Everyone is paying by check in all of my clients are. I don't have anyone. Yeah, thanks for coming, Kayla. I don't have anyone that's like not doing that. No worries, Sharon. Let's see. Let's come back to our
Super old school. I love it.
Yeah, I know. Back to the basics, right? Well, I'm also like, how anti-capitalist. I refuse to give credit card companies my money. Yay. Okay, so the other things, what else did we say? Oh, so the other thing that was that came up, let's see, hold on. And they send, yes, Petra, and they send love notes. This is an amazing byproduct that I did not know was going to happen when I switched to checks. People often put the check in a little card and they write me like a handwritten note, and it's the cutest thing. And so I collect them and they're on my fridge and they just make me smile. It's like really sweet. It feels much more intimate. So in terms of other things that are working, I think, and you'll see this in the article that I posted from Allison Davis, is selling to your existing customers. So whenever we're doing marketing, we're looking either at a group of folks that have never heard from us yet, right? Like folks that don't know us. And then we're also trying to talk to folks that know us but haven't become paying customers or clients yet. The same thing with sales. We can sell to the people who have already purchased from us. This is obviously more relevant for folks who have been in business a little bit longer or have current clients, but we can upsell or cross-sell to folks who are already working with us versus finding new clients. It's way more labor to sell to someone new than it is to sell to someone who already knows you. So if you've had a client in the past that you really enjoyed working with, checking in on them and seeing if they need more help. If you have tiers to your service, so like let's say you have $100 online course, and like I would spend most of my time selling to those folks your coaching, right? Or whatever, like try to upsell throughout the people that you already have. If you have sold workshops to an organization or a nonprofit, pitch new workshops. Like I do this every single quarter. I sit down and I think about what's interesting to me and what I'm hearing from the business community. And I draft up 5 different workshop titles and I ship them out, right? I send them around to all the nonprofits, to the banks. I send them everywhere. And I say, would you like a workshop on this? Would you like a workshop on this? And then that's a way for me to like continue working with folks that are already paying me and just offering new things. It's why I also am constantly asking you all, what the heck do you want? What do you need help with? So I can pitch workshops that feel relevant and interesting. So yeah, considering like, are you focusing a lot on selling to new people, or is there space and room to sell to the folks you already have? Because that can take a lot less work and bring in money quicker. I'll pause there for a second. Any questions before I start to move on to like other pieces? Questions, thoughts, reflections?
I have a question.
Yeah,
I have a
go for
question
it,
about
Maris.
clients, which is how much do you notice that you need to repackage and jazz up what you are actually offering so people will feel like it's a new thing? When
Can you give me a
sometimes,
specific example?
like, yeah, like if they've done a lot of business courses with you, or maybe some coaching, and what you're further offering is different elements of business coaching, are you
Hmm.
finding that like having a distinctly different title for the next workshop, but it's still like a continuation element of business
Yeah,
coaching is like what draws people in. And it's kind of like the
yes.
way that you've built the workshop that is the key.
Yes. Yes. So I have found for anyone that has like attended my last 3 or 4 workshops, if you were perceptive, you may have noticed there are slides that repeated through those workshops. So often what I'm doing is like teaching, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're saying, Maris, because I think part of what you were saying is like teaching new stuff, but often what I'm doing is like repeating the same information under a new title and under a new, maybe a new lens a little bit, or coming at it from a slightly different angle. The other thing I found is people tend to gravitate towards um like time specific things. So like for instance, I have been teaching email marketing for years, and just yesterday I hosted a workshop on holiday email marketing, right? So I like gave it a theme and it brought a whole new group of people coming in, right? And so just playing like, again, that stuff is interesting and fun to me. It doesn't feel like super annoying. I know for some folks they're like, this sounds like hell. I don't want to do this. And that's legit. Like that's totally fine. Um, there are other topics where like my marketing without social media, I do not need to ever change that. I could just play that shit on repeat every single month and people would register because it's like it's that big of a drive. So there's some things that I'm like, I don't mess with it. I might update the slides a little bit each quarter just because like I like new things and I get, and I might have learned some small piece of new information along the way, or like the climate has changed slightly. But other stuff, I do spend a lot of time of like, how do I reposition email marketing in like 15 different ways, right? And I will say, like, this is a place that I'm a little bit guilty of sometimes using ChatGPT, which I know is like a big no-no. Um, and we can all judge me and dive into that. But sometimes what I will do is like I'll take a workshop, like I can take my whole slide deck and upload it into ChatGPT and say like give me 5 variations on this workshop. And even if it's just giving me the titles of variations on the workshop, like that for me, like sparks an idea. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I could run with that. Um, Lori, I only say ChatGPT if you haven't read about like the immense water usage and environmental destruction that ChatGPT is responsible for. It's like it's pretty fucking bad. So like that is my qualm with it, among like further wealth consolidation of tech billionaires. But uh yeah, so I think it's like that's something that sometimes if I am getting stuck or I'm like I'm feeling like I need, again, it's hard for me to find people and places to brainstorm with. It's part of why I ask you guys so many times like what you need and what you want, because it's like that's the only way I can get input. Um and so, yeah, it's like it's a tool. I don't think it's a tool that we should use often. But if you're getting really stuck, things like that, or doing some market research with your audience can help. Yeah, yeah, I know, like it's terrifying. Um, Other questions, thoughts? Sandy, did you have a question? I thought you had a question before during Maris's question. You guys were about to talk at the same time. I know your video's off, so maybe not.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Of course. Okay, so other steps that I had teed up for today, we could talk about a sales call process if that feels helpful, if anyone's like doing sales calls and wants to explore that. Um, if I think about just like the stages of a sales process, um, the sales part is really like if we do I'm like, where's the whiteboard? Let's do a whiteboard, guys. Can you see this? Oh my. I'm like, okay. How do I make it like, there we go. Okay. So we go like this. Guys, look at how good I'm doing drawing. I'm so proud. Okay. Thank you. All right. So if we think about, I'm sure at some point in time you've heard of like a sales funnel or a marketing funnel. The top of that funnel is what's usually called like awareness. And so this is where we're like trying to reach new humans, right? Like we want, if we're looking for people to become aware of us for the first time, this is usually like the stage in marketing, where you are like, so for instance, if we look at like my marketing channels, awareness is often my workshops. So that's where like people who have never met me before are coming to experience me for the first time. From there, it goes into engagement. My engagement phase is usually like my email list. So once you go to a workshop, folks often will like either download something from me as a result of the workshop, or they'll go check out my website, or they get on the email list in some capacity. And so now they're starting to actually converse with me. I would say office hours tends to be more, what I've found is office hours tends to be more engagement focused for me. I don't often get a lot of new humans in office hours like I do in the workshop. And the reason that happens is the workshop is being promoted by someone else. It's being promoted by a third party. So it's reaching audiences that are not mine. This is a crucial component to marketing. We have to be able to like reach new humans. So figuring out how you do that, I would say, like, for me, what's been most effective is tapping into other people's audiences. So some people call this like a JV, like a joint venture workshop or experience or whatever. So you're taking your content and you're delivering it to somebody else's audience. You could do this in like an Instagram live. You could do this in like an email newsletter takeover. You could do this like, you know, posting in one of those huge Facebook groups, right? Like there's lots of different ways we can like find new audiences. It's super important that part of your marketing strategy includes this, that you're finding new humans in some capacity. But then how we get those new humans down into this engagement piece, this is where you often, you know, this is part of why I like email marketing so much, is it usually goes along with having some sort of like lead magnet or opt-in or download or whatever, right? You've built some resource that's free, that's helpful for people. Like if I was Emily, maybe I would be thinking about like I might build actually one that would be I think fun, Emily. I don't know how many different models of like housing units you have, but like having a quiz, you have five. So having a quiz that someone takes that helps them like what's your like your house profile, right? And like you take a little quiz to figure that out. That would be a really fun lead magnet, right? And you capture their email address that way, you learn a little bit about them, and then you can follow up with like a personalized email, right? So that would be an example of engagement. So folks in this engagement phase, my number one focus is to get people to respond to my emails. I want you to write back to me. I want you to talk to me. I want to get to know you. Like I'm genuinely trying to build a relationship. If it's office hours, I'm like getting a little FaceTime with you. I get to see you. I get to hear more about your personal things you're working on. And then from here, it's like the last bucket here is sales. This is the last step. So like most of this funnel is marketing, right? Most of the time we're focused on marketing, but it's this last piece here. And I would say each of us like probably struggle with one of these three elements the most. If anyone's like, no, Emily, I struggle with all of these things equally, I totally understand. But most of us, I would say, tend to have one of these three sections that's the most challenging, either based on like our lived experiences or our personality or just like just basic like repetition, like how many times you've done it. Um, that is that's where, you know, I encourage like spending a little time. So like what qualifies as sales would be like if you're at a farmer's market, like what are you actually saying to someone at the table to get them to purchase your product? If you're a consultant, it's most likely a sales call, right? There's probably some sort of sales call component there. If it's like a digital product that you're trying to get someone to pay, it's usually the sales page, right? And like the checkout page, that's what we're looking at. So that sales piece is like the final push, it's the final step over the edge. And there's a lot of different ways you can do sales. Like for folks, some folks hate sales calls, and so they find other ways around that. For some folks, like for me, sales calls are super easy. I love sales calls because to me, it's like just an opportunity to talk, and I love talking. So it feels easy for me to do that. But yeah, let's see. We had a couple of questions in here. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any questions about this pyramid? No worries, Rose. It was nice to see you, love. Any questions about this part before I go to the questions of the chat? Does that make sense how like, we have these three stages? All three stages are necessary. We can't really skip any of them.
Can I just lodge the usual complaint about when I'm really busy actually doing the work? The last thing that
Yes.
I have slash make time for is the like the other two, the top two ones,
The
which
top two.
then
Yeah.
when I'm
Yeah.
done doing all that work, that bites me in the ass.
Yeah. And so to that point, we should never be trying to improve our skills at all three stages at the same time. You should always be rotating through these activities. So usually what I'll do is like right now, I'm actually very much due for an awareness stage. And I usually tend to work in like 90-day cycles. So I'll spend about 90 days really focused on awareness. And then I'll spend and I'll kind of, it's like during that 90 days, if my focus is awareness, it's like 75 to 80% of my attention is really going towards awareness. And I'm going to do the bare minimum in terms of engagement. Like I'll reply to emails that come through, but like you're probably not going to get the level of like love and energy and input that you would get from me if I'm in an engagement phase. And that's like I'm just one person, like I can only I work 25 hours a week. I got two little kids. I got shit to do. So like I'm going to do my very best, right? But I cannot do both of these buckets at 100% all the time. It's just not possible. So think about like what would it look like to spend 3 months really focused on awareness, doing the bare minimum of engagement, and then what would it look like to flip that and spend 90 days on engagement? And when you're doing 90 days engagement, I actually don't even fuck with awareness at all. I'm just like, I don't do any of it. If anything new comes in, like it's just an accidental byproduct of what I'm doing. I have no attention to that whatsoever. I'm really focused on trying to like deepen relationships and pour value into my email and like show up for my clients that I have. And I'm trying to get this bucket to go to this bucket, right? And then for folks that are like, that are really uncomfortable with sales, I would say like spending some time here, I would actually kind of work on this first, like get confident enough to do sales. However, that sales strategy is, if it's sales calls, if it's your website, if it's at a market, or if you table at like a conference or like whatever. Try to get really confident at that so that you can just spend time going back and forth. Right now, I don't need to spend any time really here because I know what I'm doing. So I can just spend time going back and forth between these buckets. And when people naturally fall there, I'm ready. It's fine. And then I go back and forth between the other two. Yeah. Emily, did you have a question?
I did. I know I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
But if you can keep going, it'll probably come back.
Any questions on that and like taking turns with things versus trying to do them all at the same time, which
Oh,
is
I remember.
exhausting? Ah, good. Go for it.
So for the engagement like section, I feel like a
Mhm.
lot of what we've been trying to do internally right now is score our leads to make sure that we're spending like resources on leads that would more likely close than ones that would
Mhm.
not. And I'm
Sure.
curious, like, because I know that there's like a lot of people, especially in like the housing market, who are looking now who might make a move in the next 3 years, right? So
Yes.
there's like
Yeah.
there's an important piece to
Yes. Yeah.
engagement. And I guess, is there a
Yeah.
good measure or like way to distribute resources to make sure that we're still hitting that while
Mhm.
also like not spending all of our time doing that, I guess,
Yeah.
for sales that might
Yeah.
not come in for
So
3 years?
yeah, this is a really good point. So some people, this is where like time will only tell, but all of us, our client and customers have a specific sales timeline. And so knowing how long it takes. So what I would do is I would look at your historical data, if you can, if you have this data, and figure out what is the longest it takes folks to convert to a paying customer and what's the shortest it takes, and then figure out the average. Like on average, is it 3 years? On average, is it a year and a half? For some folks, it's like 6 months. Figuring out from the moment they become aware of you to the moment they start to really engage, to the moment they become a paying client or customer, what are those time domains? Because that will help influence like how much time. So let's say you're like, yeah, on average, folks take, I'm guessing not on average it's 3 years, but maybe that's like an outlier, like some are 3 years. It's maybe
Mhm.
more a year and a half, 2 years. I mean, buying a house is a big decision, right? This is where you also need to think about like how big of a purchase am I asking? How big of a decision? How many decision makers have to come to the table for this to happen, right? The more that all those things increase, the more friction you're going to experience. And so, or not even necessarily friction, but like the longer it's going to take, maybe. And so what I would think about is like, okay, let's say your average customer purchases a home in a year and a half. I would then think about like what's a good, better, best goal for how often you want to interact with that person, and what kind of information do you think they need to make an informed decision in that timeline. And so, for instance, if you're like, okay, it's a year and a half, that's 18 months. Over the course of 18 months, I think they need to understand like these 5 things. I would then plot that over the 18 months, like maybe every 2 months, they're hearing from you about point A, and then 2 months later, point B, and then 2 months later, point C, right? I would think about what are the things they need to know in order to be informed. How many of those things do they need to know? And what is the timeline in which I want to deliver that? So if you have that map, you can then hopefully like either write those emails or schedule those check-in phone calls or like whatever, however it is you communicate with them. Hopefully you can schedule that out ahead of time and like relatively automate it and then apply it across the board is ideally what we want to have happen, right? You're hopefully not having to like write individualized things for every single person that's coming through this channel. You might have like a couple different client personas. Maybe you have like people fit into one of 3 types of human. But it shouldn't be anytime someone's like, no, my clients are everything's customized. Everything's like, everyone's different. My guess is they're not. Like, my guess is they have some common denominators and we just need to like step back and see what they are.
Figure out what those are. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
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 Thank you. That's super helpful.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like the sooner we can acknowledge how long it takes for someone to buy and like be okay with that. I think sometimes we resist that because we're like, no, we need this to happen now. But if we just step back and are like, no, it takes this long, it takes 2 years, then like, okay, then what does that look like? What does that sales strategy look like? Let's set up a 2-year sales pipeline. And just be okay with that, right? And then that would impact, if we know it takes 2 years for them to go from engagement to sales, that impacts our awareness strategy, right? So that means every time I do an awareness push, I should expect to see X amount of humans in Y amount of time come into the engagement, right?
Okay.
So we can start to look backwards at that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, Emily. Okay, so it looked like we have Emily and Maris's questions are similar, so I'll pull those together, and then I think that'll bring us to time. Okay, so Emily, you asked about discuss Vermont options in Vermont for lending and grants that would help subsidize costs for customers. Yeah. I'm assuming you've like gone through the usual channels of like the Vermont Housing Trust and like all those folks. You have, yeah. Who else have you talked to?
We talked to, there's like a VHIP 2.0 program, which is part of the Vermont Housing Trust. And then there's another one that I'm blanking on, but just those two. It was like
Have you talked to the mayor?
No.
You should talk to the mayor.
Okay.
That's what I would do.
And I think there was like a
you're welcome.
County
yeah.
one, but
let me noodle. Have you checked in with like Youth Build and like Resource and those folks?
No.
Okay, if you want to shoot me an email with this question, I'm happy to make some introductions.
Okay.
I can hand you off to Emma. I can hand you off to a guy named Dan at Youth Build. And then let me noodle on, like, I wonder, like, how does Habitat for Humanity get houses subsidized?
That's a great question.
I would ask them and figure out how they get that to happen. I mean, we desperately need housing, so I think there's a lot of people working on this. And if you can be part of the solution, that's a win-win.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Email me that question. I'll come up with more introductions.
Sounds good.
And then
Thank you.
Maris, you said, yeah, totally. You said curious about my story of how I got connected originally with the bank's nonprofits to offer workshops. And was it a cold email? Yeah, that's a